Johnston, and I will be chairing the webinar. And you'll forgive me if I use some notes, because a little bit of dense information I have to let you have, so I have notes beside me. So our webinar is being hosted by three powerful grassroots organisations: Merced Cymru, LGB Alliance Cymru, and Wales Women's Rights Network, all grassroots groups who've grown organically over the last 2 years in the UK. Merced Cymru describes itself as a group of ordinary women who want to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls. LGB Alliance's vision is to see lesbians, gay men and bisexuals living free from discrimination or disadvantage based on their sexual orientation. And Women's Rights Network is made up of women from across the UK joining forces to defend women's sex-based rights. So I want to give you some context as to why we're having this webinar. The Relationships and Sexuality Education Code was passed into law by the Welsh Government in December 21. This legislation is within the new curriculum for Wales's area of learning known as health and well-being, and attendance at RSE lessons will be compulsory for all children from the ages of 3 to 16. The need for the webinar became clear after scrutiny of the RSE code revealed that crucial topics such as safeguarding pornography and its ease of access, sexual violence, gender stereotyping, and supporting gender non-conforming children were neglected or indeed omitted from the code. In the same month as the code became law, Estyn, which is the Welsh equivalent of Ofsted, produced a report entitled Experiences of Peer-on-Peer Sexual Harassment among Secondary school pupils in Wales. If I could have the first slide, please. Some of the shocking statistics on this slide convinced us that we needed to look at this code carefully, and the slide will come up any moment now. There we go. So, no, it's the second, the slide before that, please. Thank you. The pie chart in the middle will give you an idea about how serious sexual harassment is in school. 61% of female pupils report personal experience of sexual harassment or seeing others experience it, and 29% of boys and young men. 54% of pupils with a disability and 56% of sixth formers have experienced sexual harassment. And a shockingly high statistic, 95% of sixth formers have seen others being sexually harassed. And what's also very worrying is 46% of the pupils kept that fact to themselves. They don't tell anybody. It is the case that girls tend to tell their friends, but they don't go to adults with the problem. So given this appalling reality, it's not unreasonable for educators, parents, and in particular our children, to expect a robust and wide-reaching code and guidance on RSE, but that's not what we got. Broadly, we have 5 areas of concern, and each of which Merced Cymru included in our response to the Welsh Government's consultation document back at the end of 21. What we'd like to see is high quality, age-appropriate, scientifically accurate information which is accessible for all our children and young people to enable them to live and love safely and healthily, regardless of their background or protected characteristics. We also need clarity around definitions and an end to the conflation of terms sex and gender. It's important to use accurate terminology and objective facts. If we can't define and recognize sex, then we can't address sexism. There are inherent tensions and contradictions in the way sex and gender are represented in the code, and this raises concerns on how RSE will be mainstreamed throughout the curriculum. There needs to be provision to address the impact of biological sex, sexism and stereotyping on boys and girls. And importantly, we need to focus on addressing additional barriers, harassment, discrimination, and the risk of harm experienced by girls and young women because they're girls, because they're female. Clear guidance is needed for schools and youth groups to be able to, so they can judge what is and isn't appropriate for inclusion in lessons, in RSE lessons. This assurance is already provided by the Department of Education in England, and we expect no less from the Welsh Government. And finally, a central list of approved resources and organisations which school and youth groups can use confident in the knowledge that they are properly vetted and DBS checked in line with safeguarding best practice. We hope this webinar is a first step to filling these gaps. Could I have a second slide, please? So we aim to provide an overview of an ideal evidence-based RSE curriculum. A curriculum that considers all our children, whatever their learning needs, one that is aware of their specific vulnerabilities and their potential, and one that challenges the misogyny that results from our porn-soaked culture. Pornography will come up a few times this morning. It's one of the biggest problems we're facing with our young people. And also, we'd like a curriculum that works with parents and prioritises safeguarding. We've also planned to create a list of resources and providers who have expertise, knowledge and experience in the field. And this list will offer positive evidence-based alternatives, both in resources and providers. So how is our webinar going to pan out this morning? Well, it's divided into 3 parts. The first of which will give us an overview of what effective RSE looks like from the point of view of knowing the challenges facing schools and parents and placing safeguarding as the #1 priority. The second part is about inclusion, and our speakers will discuss autism, privacy and gender non-conforming children and how bullying and homophobia can and must be tackled. The final part of the webinar will look at tough topics such as violence against women and girls and pornography, and what our educators can do to counteract these problems, which are major issues in today's society. So we have 7 speakers, each of them experts in their own field, who are going to outline for us what's important to include in a robust RSE curriculum. I would like to thank each of them for agreeing to take part in our webinar and sharing their experience with us. Their presentations this morning will be short, about 10 minutes or so, followed by, as I say, it's divided into 3 sections. So after the second speaker this morning, we'll have a question and answer section. And after each section, there'll be question and answers. Put your questions into the Q&A button. They will filter through either to me or to the speakers, and we'll work that through. It'll work out fine. We'll try to answer them all. Even if you have technical questions, put them through to us on the question and answer session. So our first 2 speakers will give us an overview of what effective RSE delivery looks like. Our first speaker of the day is Stephanie Davis-Arlai. She's the founder of Transgender Trend, which was founded with the aim of disseminating research and evidence-based information for parents and professionals on the subject of children with gender dysphoria. She's also a parent effectiveness trainer and the author of the book Communicating with Kids. Stephanie will speak today on what is influencing and capturing our children and how an ideal RSE needs to address the reality of these influences. So as I say, put your questions in the question and answer session if you need to, and I'm handing over to Stephanie now. Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome.
Thanks, Deirdre. So I'm going to go straight in. I'm going to show you, in fact, I'm going to bombard you with slides. I'm not going to talk that much, because what I thought I'd do today was actually show the culture from which this generation is coming to their RSE lessons and what they're learning online. And to do this, I think there are 2 issues. There are lots, but there are 2 issues that to me jump out in what children are being exposed to, this generation, this online generation. One is porn and one is and the other one is gender identity. So when I go through, I'm focusing on gender identity and how what messages children are receiving and imbibing online and in life. And really, to get a full picture, I'm going to focus on girls. With boys, some of it, what I'm showing you, it would be similar influence on boys, but there are different things online that influence boys as well. I'm focusing on girls just because the issues of sexual harassment and rape culture in schools is a really serious and scandalous issue affecting girls. But to really imagine this generation's world that they're living in, you have to imagine that this slideshow also presents the most horrific, degrading images of women being abused in porn, because that's the other side of this story. And I think the 2 areas are very linked. in why so many girls are rejecting becoming women, and particularly at puberty, and that this is unprecedented. The number of, or the fact that girls are developing gender dysphoria during or at the beginning of puberty. So to start, I can get this moving. Right. Okay, just very briefly to start, that over the last decade, because things have changed so much, there's such a massive increase in the number of adolescents, and particularly girls, who are presenting at gender clinics, is the change in concept of being transgender and the language. So in the past, we would talk of a gender dysphoric child, normally male, normally before puberty, and we would understand that it was part of a developmental process, that there were many outcomes in adulthood, most likely gay or lesbian identity, but heterosexual with a resolution of that gender dysphoria or cross-sex identity. So transsexual was a potential outcome and the least likely one. That's now changed. We now call these children transgender children, and we understand it, or it has been promoted as an innate condition that children are born with, and that children have an innate gender identity. So this is a slide from GIAS, the Gender Identity Research and Education Society. And this is from a document, it's the first sort of schools anti-bullying document that I know of. It was published by the Home Office in 2008, and then a second version in 2010. And this is the idea that in the womb, you have an idea or an inner sense of being a boy or a girl right from the start, even though gender is seen as a social construct. It's somehow also there before birth, before you have any social understanding. So that's the idea that this is based on. And now let's look at what children are seeing online. I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, because I want you to feel bombarded with this just as teenagers are. So looking online, all the resources that teenagers can get hold of, and when I say teenagers, it's younger than that actually. It's you can get a gender identity workbook for teens with practical exercise to navigate your exploration. And as I go through, I'm going to just briefly say what the message is that children are getting. So your gender is something that you explore. It's a journey, and it's a celebration. It's a celebration of who you really are. You can get your Gender Quest workbook, and this is a way of learning to express yourself, navigate on your journey. Again, it's an exploration. And you can get your Gender Journey journal, where you can write every day. And some of these exercises within these journals include images such as the river with bends in it, and at every bend in the river, you can decide, you have a moment of do you turn, or and every part of children's behavior, they are encouraged to interpret through the lens of gender. Does this behavior, does this interest make me a girl or a boy? So this is a new task for this generation that no other generation has had to do, to find out themselves if they are a boy or a girl. You can do a gender identity test, 90% accurate quiz here. So this quiz tells children that governments dictate and impose gender at birth, and of course sometimes make mistakes, as parents do, that whether you're born male or female is irrelevant, that you could be a girl or a boy despite your biological sex. You can get a trans self-care workbook, so you need to really being trans, you need to have self-care, you need to look after yourself. You can get a certificate of transness in this book. And this introduces us to the idea of cisgender. It says or one of the messages I think that is coming from an adult activist movement. This certificate verifies that name is trans enough to identify as whatever, and anyone who says otherwise can go eat rocks. So this is one of the key messages, that nobody else has the right to question you, only you know who you are. Here we have the Trans Teen Survival Guide, which I think the graphics of this show the message that this is edgy and this is cool. And this is a really, this is a cool subculture to belong to. And it introduces the idea that you need to survive it. It's not easy, it's a journey. It may be a difficult journey and you need to survive. In this book, there is the trans umbrella, and we have the concept of cisgender coming in again here, very graphically and symbolically, that if you can read it, the cis raindrops are falling on the trans parade. So the trans umbrella includes non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, bigender, pangender, agender, all of these different gender identities, and these horrible cis people, boring cis people are raining on our parade. This is from Twitter. This is part of the Young Teaching the Young. Things I didn't know were dysphoria. And this is another message from adult activists that any condition means that you're trans. So it could be depression, anxiety, could be eating disorders, it could be autism. All of these issues may be indication that you're trans. And this message is reflected here by this young person. I didn't know, things I didn't know were dysphoria, feeling desperately sad and uncomfortable when I had to dress fancy or sexy, which is a pretty common thing in adolescence. Eating disorders, maybe if I was skinnier, my body would curve in a better place. So again, it's something that's very common amongst teenage girls in particular, but now they're being encouraged to conceptualize these feelings as an indication that they're trans. And this one makes me laugh, just loathing my hearing my voice in recordings, which, you know, I never listen back. And I think I think most people would probably have that, would agree with that. This is just an example, because where this message that you're special, this is your authentic self, this is who you really are, this is your inner identity, where, you know, this wouldn't matter if we were talking about goths or emos or any other sort of identity during adolescence, but this particular one, the inevitable pathway leads to medicalization. And this is just an example of the thousands of YouTube videos online, mostly from young women who are documenting their trans journey, and the journey is going into medical intervention. And so they document the passage of taking testosterone, the change in their voice, in the beard. And of course, when you're doing a video, you need to keep the narrative going. These videos have hundreds of thousands of teenage girl followers. But you need to keep your fan base by constantly driving the narrative, which, you know, to me is really worrying, because when you inevitably get to the double mastectomy and the showing off the double mastectomy scars. So that's just one example, my 1 year on testosterone transition video. And these videos really glamorize, I mean, the world that our children live in. There are influencers and YouTube stars. They're very, very well known. And a lot of these transitioners are very well known online. And again, it's the girls watching these videos see these people as experts. Now, I don't want to put exploitative pictures up. I'm using this one, I'll move on quickly, just to show this is Pink News doing a project with Snapchat, Pure Trans Joy. So I'm moving on from that, because there are so many images of women with double mastectomies all across the internet, and I don't want to add to it, but it's just to one example of how this is presented to young girls, that this is pure joy. This is gender euphoria, is a phrase that's used. And I just add that slide of a booklet that we have on our site about called Transmission of Transition about those videos. Because it's not just online, now it's in schools. And this graphic from Mermaids, I think it's very instructive. Where on the spectrum might your gender identity be? And the choice for girl, if your gender identity is girl, then you are identifying as a pink plastic vacuous passive Barbie doll. And if you identify as a boy, you are identifying as a macho, aggressive, fighty man. So that's what boys and girls are. And this, I think, is a great illustration of why so many young people now identify as non-binary, which of course we all are non-binary. We're all on the spectrum of personality. But I think that
1 minute, please.
Illustrates that very quickly. And this is from a girls' school, and part of the glamorization of gender identities. Everybody has their different flag, but note on this chart who has the flag with grey stripes, the boring cisgender child, and which adolescent would admit to being the boring cisgender child. And this is the genderbread person, which is used in schools, which describes sex as a quality of maleness or femaleness, so not a biological material reality. This message is going to younger children. The message is that if you have likes or interests more associated with the opposite sex, then you really are the opposite sex. And there's a selection of books for early years and primary years, and a book for schools which is the first book to teach children about medical transition, and it's aimed at 7-year-olds upwards. And this is going out into the wider world. This is the Science Museum, which shows that you can have a prosthetic penis if you're a girl and you identify as a boy. And I've finished with just that slide to show this is really an illustration of the wider culture that our children are being brought up in. So I think for the RSE curriculum, we need to ask the question, do we reinforce these messages that children are learning online? Is it helpful or is it harmful to children to understand themselves through the lens of gender identity? Is it good for children's mental health to be constantly examining and analysing their personalities in terms of gender, or is it causing mental health problems? And how do we help children manage all of these messages they are bombarded with online, in school, in wider society? How do we help them critically examine and analyse the materials that they're seeing? That's my challenge for any RSE curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Stephanie. That was absolutely fantastic and shocking. But I think, to be fair, we need to be shocked to understand where this is going and what we need to do to support our children. Our next speaker is Tanya Carter, who is one of the spokeswomen for Safe Schools Alliance UK, which is a grassroots group of parents and professionals founded in 2019. They came together to uphold safeguarding and the correct interpretation of the Equality Act 2010 in schools. Tanya will talk today about what matters to parents, especially safeguarding and boundaries. And don't forget, you can put your questions into the Q&A section, and we'll get around to answering those soon. Thanks, Tanya, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today to speak about what parents we hear from, what matters to them, and what parents need to know. First, a quick warning, I will be talking about serious case reviews and child abuse in my talk, so if that's particularly upsetting for anybody, do feel free to leave for a while. At Safe Schools, we are very in favour of relationships and sex education. We believe it's a crucial part of safeguarding children, and the vast majority of parents who we hear from agree with us. We hear from parents from all walks of life, from those whose children attend the state sector and also those in the private sector. We hear from parents from all faiths and none. We hear from single parents, from same-sex parents, from grandparents, and from aunts and uncles. They are all very different in lots of ways, but they all love their children and they all share a desire to protect them. They all want to be involved constructively with their children's lives, and they want to work together with their children's schools. We also hear from a lot of teachers, again from all different types of schools. They too desperately want to get this important subject right, and they want to work together with parents. While the parents and teachers that contact us are a diverse bunch, they also do have a lot in common. They all understand the importance of working together for the benefit of children, and they want to get education on this right. They are really disturbed when they encounter people who don't want this. All good parents and teachers know that boundaries are an important part of raising children to be well-rounded and functional members of society. If you haven't already done so, you can read more about safeguarding and boundaries on my blog on Mech Cymru's website. Boundaries are also a really important part of safeguarding. Adults who are unable to keep appropriate boundaries between them and the children that they teach are a recognised safeguarding concern, as is anyone who doesn't understand that children and adults are different. Safeguarding children is the responsibility of every single adult in society. It is also some people's jobs. Safeguarding frameworks are based on our collective learning from previous reviews and inquiries that have been carried out when things have gone wrong. The latest review that we have had in England has been released this week, and you may have heard of Child Q. It was an investigation into the treatment of a 15-year-old black girl who was strip searched at her school by Met police officers. There was no appropriate adult present for this intimate search. The school failed to call Child Q's mother or any other adult to advocate for her, and the teachers failed to fulfill this role themselves. The school called the police after smelling cannabis and being unable to locate any drugs on the child. The police, despite subjecting this girl to a humiliating search that involved the exposure of her genitals while menstruating, also found no drugs. Child Q remains traumatised by her experiences. The fallout from this horrific incident is incredibly damaging to both race relationships and parents' confidence in schools' ability to safeguard their children. A lot of work is going to have to be done here to restore trust. The report notes that the school should have been more challenging to the police, that all practitioners need to be mindful of their duties to uphold the best interests of children. And it states the school staff had an insufficient focus on the safeguarding needs of Child Q. There are many recommendations made in the report for the police, for all practitioners, for the Home Office, and for the Department of Education. They include the need for clearer guidance, a clearer understanding of safeguarding, and the responsibilities of adults to children in their care, the importance of working together with families, and training on adultification. Adultification is particularly pertinent to Black children. Children must not be treated as older than they are. Under 18s are children, and they are entitled to the protection of adults. They must not be exposed to experiences unsuitable for their age. So we have established that most parents want to work in partnership with schools, and that this is an important part of safeguarding. Therefore, it is shocking that we have seen footage of some self-appointed RSE experts advising rooms full of teachers to not consult with parents on the content of RSE programmes. Teachers should be alert to any training that seeks to undermine basic safeguarding principles such as working together. If any such suggestion is made, it should arouse professional curiosity to have a very thorough look at all materials through a safeguarding lens. We know that predators will always try to groom children, and that part of that grooming process will be to groom those protective adults that stand in their way. We know that this grooming can be done in person or online. We also need to be aware that grooming of both adults and children can be done via materials purporting to be RSE resources. We have seen resources that go far beyond what most parents want. Most parents want their children to be factually educated about puberty, so that the changes to their growing bodies do not come as a shock to them. They want children to know how babies are made. They are happy with factual information regarding prevention of pregnancy and STDs, though some religions object to contraception and will want their views acknowledged. The vast majority of parents want their children to be able to assert their boundaries and know who to speak to if someone is breaking those boundaries. They want children to know what the law is in this country and that not all families are the same as their own. Parents are desperately worried about porn and what else their children may be exposed to online. Most parents understand the importance of sex-based segregation for safeguarding purposes. After all, they were all teens once. They are alarmed when schools have mixed-sex toilets, changing rooms, overnight accommodation, sports and sex ed classes. It is blindingly obvious why these things are not a good idea. What no responsible parent wants for their child is materials that suggest extreme porn is liberating, directs children to chemsex sites, or suggests that an emerging same-sex attraction may be a sign of being trans and a reason for young girls to bind their breasts. Sadly, we have seen all these materials aimed at children in schools. It is imperative that teachers check all materials with a view to safeguarding. Schools cannot abdicate responsibility to safeguard to an outside agency. If the children are in your care, you are responsible for what is taught and ensuring its suitability. If it would not be appropriate in the normal way of things, it is not appropriate just because it claims that it is an RSE resource or inclusive. Just because materials claim that they are endorsed by the Welsh Government or anyone else, it doesn't mean that they actually are, and it doesn't mean that they are appropriate. Teachers are responsible for safeguarding the children in their care. This includes ensuring that they are not exposed to materials that are age inappropriate, erode their boundaries, promote self-harm, damage relationships with parents, include homophobic definitions, misrepresent the law, or promote partisan politics. Teachers must teach all sex education on the assumption that there is at least one child in the class that is being or has previously been abused. The teacher will not know who this child is, as they have probably yet to disclose. They may not even realise that what they have been subjected to is abuse. That realisation may come in the lesson. It must always be at the forefront of teachers' thoughts how the materials will be received by that abused child. Will they help them? Will they reinforce what an abuser may have said to them? Will they increase a child's feelings of shame, or will they give them the confidence to disclose? Parents must also check materials. Parents, like all adults, have a duty to safeguard. If schools do not volunteer the materials to parents, ask to see them. Decent schools will welcome this engagement. If they do not, then that is a cause for concern, and all the more reason to obtain them and scrutinise them thoroughly. If you take a look at our website, we have many resources to assist parents and teachers, including fact sheets on single-sex spaces, RSE and the law, and our latest guide on how to talk to and engage with schools about RSE and PSHE. We are currently working on a new fact sheet on what schools need to be aware of following the interim CAS review. This will complement our existing advice note on social transition. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along and listening to me. It's really good to see so many of you here. We all have a responsibility to safeguard children, and RSE is an important part of that safeguarding. So we all have a duty as adults, as professionals, as teachers and parents, to work together and ensure that we get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. That was absolutely fantastic. You hit on so many things there. I think resources and the outside people providing resources, we need such a careful vetting system here. I have some questions, not many, but I'll first to you, Tanya, if you would please. Well, it's a thank you to thank Safe Schools Alliance for such great resources, which we know are fantastic. We even use them ourselves in Wales here. Also, Tanya, I gather that Department of Education England has published guidelines about RSE in terms of the curriculum, resources and providers. Do you think this is enough to ensure safeguarding? The guidelines from the your Department of Education. Do you think they could go further? Oh, sorry.
Oh, they could definitely go further. Yes, they have released guidelines, and the guidelines are largely very good, but there seems to be absolutely no enforcement, and it really does seem to be the case that it is down to parents to ask to see resources, and it's down to parents to challenge the schools. There seems to be no support for parents from the Department for Education, and a lot of teachers we're hearing from, there's no support from unions when they are concerned by materials, because a lot of the unions are also promoting inappropriate materials. So yes, what the Department for Education has put out is good, but it doesn't go anywhere near far enough, and we really want to see them take greater responsibility for the safeguarding of all children.
Thank you, Tanya. I have a question for Stephanie, if you're still here. Yes, you are. This is the last question. We'll go on to the next section then. I'm worried about primary schools telling children that they can change sex, or that if a girl likes football, she might be a boy. Other than My Body Is Me, are there other resources that challenge this? Well, there are, yes.
Well, yes. I mean, we put out our new book, but it's for slightly older tweens, but still the primary age, called Sex and Gender. You can also find that, and I think we're going to have links under this webinar with those resources. I think that, you know, old-fashioned children's picture books that don't go into this. I've counted over 30 picture books for early years and young children selling this message that you can't know whether you're a boy or a girl, that you have to find that out. And the other I think really damaging message or insidious message in these books is the only way to respond to it. A boy who says, I'm a girl, that to be a good friend, to be supportive, you have to accept it, and that it's nobody else's business to know which sex you are. And to me, that's a grooming message to very young children that erodes their boundaries. So I would say, I mean, there are loads of lovely picture books for children that don't do that. It's quite a recent thing, but I would really question any school that has any of these books, like Introducing Teddy, 10,000 Dresses, I Am Jazz, any of those trans books. What's interesting is the books that are about gay and lesbian people tend to be set in the adult world, or they tend to be about two mummies or two daddies, but the trans books are all about children transitioning, and or teddy bears or penguins, or so I would say just keep those books out. You know, we're always working at producing more books, but I think the important thing is to keep those books out of schools.
Thanks, Stephanie. And we will be sending links to all the attendees tomorrow or in the next 24 hours, which will let you see what resources are available in all the topics we're speaking about this morning. I am going to move on now because I don't want to fall too far behind, although I have built in a little bit of extra time here and there. I will have more questions and answers later on in the session. So our next three speakers are going to cover the all-important question of inclusion. And our first speaker here is Christian Wilton King of STEM Education. Christian has worked in special education needs for 2 decades. He's an experienced trainer, autism specialist teacher, and advanced practitioner. He has a particular interest in disability rights, safeguarding, and ethics. And this morning, Christian will speak on what's important for children's well-being, focusing on autism, safeguarding, and the internet. Thank you, Christian. Over to you. And you're still on mute. Unmute.
Hello. Right, I'm just going to share my screen if I can find it. That's the one. Okay. From the beginning. Excellent. Okay. I'll get straight into it because it's 10 minutes is not a long time. So just a bit about what autism is. I'm sure quite a few people know a fair amount about autism as it is, but just to make sure. So autism is a neurological variant. It is genetically based, so it runs through families. I know that there are lots of hot topics about whether it's a disability or whether it's just a difference. I don't see it has to be so dichotomous. I think it can be a bit of both. It can be quite disabling for some people, but not so disabling for others. It involves in terms of the brain, synapses, autistic people's synapses tend to struggle to filter out any kind of the smells, sights, and sounds. So it can, because they don't filter that kind of information out too much like we do, neurotypicals, it can be quite overwhelming for a lot of autistic people. It's a developmental phenomenon, meaning it's from birth, tends to be diagnosed much more around about 2 or 3 years old. But sometimes people don't get diagnosed until a lot later in life. But because it's a developmental phenomenon, because it affects every aspect of autistic people's lives, it can lead to atypical thinking, atypical movement, interactions, and the way autistic people think. Autistic people describe themselves as thinking differently quite often, and that kind of impacts on certain things like social communication. So let's have a look. So in terms of communication, technology has moved on in recent decades in terms of making the world more accessible, making communication more accessible to autistic people. So we have a range of devices now that can work on symbols, as you can see here in these examples, and that kind of opens up the world of communication. They can express feelings. This is more for the autistic people who don't speak. And this kind of then moves on to social media. So now I'm sure most of us recognize a lot of these logos. And I think for me, the issue in terms of RSE, social media, schools, autism, in autistic circles, the internet has been in some respects quite a big godsend, because it enables autistic people to communicate with others socially, but without that kind of need or that demand for face-to-face interaction. And that kind of suits them, because that demand for eye contact can be quite intense for a lot of autistic people. So social media in some respects has opened up a lot of avenues for autistic people. However, in terms of safeguarding, there's a serious issue, because 13 plus seems to be the age at which children can get onto these applications. YouTube was parental permission, but it's not. There are no age verification things going on with any of these apps, and that's a serious issue, because quite often, apart from just a date of birth, which if you want to really get on, you could just work out what date of birth you need to put in, and there you are, you're on it. And this one is Tinder, this last one, 18 plus. So we're getting to a lot of young children, autistic children as well, are trying to get onto these apps because they want to socialize. Contrary to popular belief, it's not a case of they don't want to be with people or they don't want to socialize. I think they do find it quite difficult, but now that their avenues are opened up by this kind of thing, we have all of these wonderful new apps like Yubo, which was the subject of a Sunday Times piece recently. Very worrying. 13 to 25 only. Again, no age verification attempts going on there. So you could have very old people knowing that this is specifically for young people, and autistic children are craving that social life. They want to meet people, and because there is that serious issue with, I'll come back to it in a minute, about social communication, it's going to cause problems. So sorry, I didn't go through Reface and Omegle there, sorry. Just to reference Reface, these are the serious ones where you can take a video and put it online and then or a GIF and then put somebody else's face on it. And, obviously, a lot of young people are putting their pictures online, and that's causing a serious number of problems in terms of pornography. People are having faces put on pornographic clips. Again, serious safeguarding. In terms of schools, this is a really serious issue because it's causing a lot of problems with how do we keep our children safe on site if they are accessing such apps, even if mobile phone usage is limited. So let's look at what Estin says. I'm rushing through now, realizing I haven't got much time left. Estin, in their report on experiences of peer-on-peer sexual harassment, say almost nothing about autism, which is really disappointing. It says it's a recommendation. It says some pupil-friendly training on autism spectrum disorder for the rest of the class. So that's their recommendation for how to maybe manage or safeguard autistic children. I don't think that's anywhere near enough. It creates a them and us kind of issue. It's like, well, we need to look after these people. I think that's quite patronizing. And I think it's more serious in respect of what they say later on, or earlier on, sorry, at the very beginning of the document. They say very upfront, sexual harassment was more frequent online, specifically through mobile phones, social media and gaming sites, which is exactly the kind of things that autistic people are flocking to because they want to socialize. That's going to cause a lot of issues for schools in terms of safeguarding. And these are the major issues for me in terms of autism. It's that social communication, so that difficulty in understanding what other people might be thinking or what their intentions are. When we're talking about being online and using social media apps and messaging apps, I think that's a serious issue. That leaves them open to vulnerability, and schools really need to get a grip on managing online use on their sites, and unfortunately a lot of it happens off-site as well. So I think a lot of online safety sessions are going to be needed. In terms of the gender question, of course, as we saw with Snapchat and the like, they're very pro gender ideology. They are promoting all of these things of, if you like skirts or if you like shorts or trousers, that might therefore mean you were a boy or a girl. And I think, with autistic people, being sensitive to touch means that they are vulnerable to feeling like, I want to wear skirts. I like the feel of a skirt, or I like the feel of trousers. With autistic people, it can quite often be an issue of, pressure. They like the sense of tight feelings on the legs, and that's just a sensory issue. It's not a gender issue. So that can lead to gender nonconformity. We know that the autistic people tend to be a lot more gender nonconforming. And so when we get to online, all of the apps are there, being their savior, opening up communications to them. And these last two issues I've put in terms of being vulnerable is that they can be quite rigid in their thinking. They're black and white thinking. This is bad, this is good. When something seems like it's not right, they will damn well say so, and with gusto. And that can lead to a real sort of social justice sort of push. All of these things leave autistic people vulnerable. That's my timer. So what now? I'm just going to quickly finish off. So I think in terms of moving forward, there needs to be a real focus on online safety, helping these learners navigate the virtual world. I think schools need to develop a more efficient system which makes it easier for children to report bullying and online abuse. Maybe a more accessible version for autistic kids, limit the use of mobile phones and devices on school premises. I'm sure a lot of schools are already doing this, but children are sneaky. We all know that. develop a virtual school environment, maybe. I'm sure that, again, that probably already happens, but I think having in-house social forums, making it easier to obviously monitoring bullying and abuse, and that kind of, you know, when I'm thinking back to the pornography thing and the issues with gender, I think there's grooming, a lot of grooming is going on in certain messaging apps. And I think, being mindful of that addictive nature of pornography and how for some autistic kids it is being used to stem feelings of loneliness. We need to get over this idea that autistic people don't want anything to do with others. They really do, but we need to sort of help them to manage that and look at the safeguarding aspects of these apps. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Lots of fantastic information there. I'm going to give you one question that's come in. Do you know if there is any UK-based research into the prevalence of neurodivergent children who identify as trans and non-binary? I mean, somewhere in the back of my head, the number of 20% of trans children have autistic.
I think the Tavistock itself produced some a document from 2 or 3 years ago, I think it might have been, and they said in their own research that up to 48% of the referrals to their Tavistock clinic had at least autistic traits, but or diagnosis of autism. So it's a lot, a hell of a lot. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Christian. We will have further questions at the question and answer session at the end. So next, we're going to have Millie Hill, who is an author and journalist with a particular focus on women's health and female biology. Her 2 books about children, The Positive Birth Book and Give Birth Like a Feminist, are bestsellers, and she's the founder of the Positive Birth Movement. Her more recent book, My Period, aims to help young girls become better informed about their menstrual health and through this to feel more positive about their incredible bodies. Today, Millie will look at what's important to girls' well-being, dignity, privacy, and the importance of biological sex and bodily autonomy. Over to you, Millie, and you're mute at the moment.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Hello. So I wonder if people have seen the recent controversy around the new Disney Pixar film, Turning Red. The film is rated PG, but even so, some parents have complained that the theme, which involves puberty and periods, is not appropriate for children to watch. It's very revealing in terms of how parents are clearly not talking to their children about periods, keeping their period products hidden from their children and carrying a lot of shame around periods. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the shame and stigma around menstruation and about how we can challenge these ingrained cultural attitudes without removing important boundaries for girls. There's always been shame and stigma around periods. I did a little bit of research on this when I was writing my book. And in the end, we decided not to put all of the stuff that I found in the book, because it was almost like teaching a whole new generation of girls if we did that, about just how much and how long and historic the shame and stigma around periods has been. But this is what Pliny the Elder had to say about period blood about 2000 years ago. He said, "Contact with it turns new wine sour. Crops touched by it become barren. Seed in gardens are dried up. The fruit of trees falls off. The edge of steel and the gleam of ivory are dulled. Hives of bees die. Even bronze and iron are at once seized by rust, and a horrible smell fills the air. To taste it drives dogs mad and infects their bites with an incurable poison." So that was 2000 years ago, but as recently as 100 years ago, some people believed that a girl with her period could cause flowers to wilt and die, stop bread from rising, kill insects that infect crops just by walking through the field, which is actually quite useful if you think about it, make baking go moldy, and prevent milk from turning to butter. And even today, in the 21st century, some of those attitudes pervade, depending on where you are in the world. And some girls are still prevented from attending places of worship, or even their schools when they have their periods and are not allowed to cook or prepare food, or have other rules about what they are allowed or not allowed to do. So it seems like people are a little bit scared of period blood. And did you know that adverts for period products were banned from our televisions until 1972, and that nobody even said the word period on TV until 1985? In 2015, a picture of a woman called Rupi Kaur with a very tiny patch of period blood on her trousers and bed sheets was taken down twice by Instagram. That was in 2015. And even the TV adverts for tampons and pads used blue liquid to show period blood until 2017. So I'd like you, if you're female and watching this, to think back to your first period. Can you remember it? Do you remember how it happened? Do you remember what your mum or the adults in your life told you beforehand to prepare you? Did you feel supported? Did you feel informed? Did you feel confident? The chances are, no, you didn't. There are still huge gaps in education and support for young people, which are, of course, passed on intergenerationally. Yes, we have shame via the messages in advertising that tell us, for example, that period product is great because nobody will hear you opening the wrapper, or the adverts with the blue liquid, or the fact that the products are called feminine hygiene or sanitary towels, both of which imply something dirty. But we also have personal shame that we then pass on to other women and especially to our daughters. So of course we need to smash the shame of periods and break this cycle. To do this, we need to all think about ways in which we can destigmatize menstruation. For example, by being open about our periods, our period products, how periods feel, and even our period blood in front of our own children from a young age, rather than keeping this aspect of our lives hidden, and especially not panicking when it's momentarily in a Disney movie. And doing this involves doing some work on ourselves and thinking about how we feel about periods, whether we can use words like vulva with confidence. Giving thought to these issues can bring up complex feelings and even memories of difficult experiences. But it's helpful to do this because if we want to change the way the next generation feels about periods and their female bodies, we have to start with ourselves. And parents need to do this work. And so, of course, do teachers, because if you're going to teach a class of children about periods and you've never thought for yourself about your own experiences of it, then you're not starting from perhaps the most informed place. But what about privacy? Is privacy also about shame? The short answer is no, but I think that this is an area of confusion and it can sometimes be dressed up as a progressive argument against single-sex spaces. It's normal for girls to feel awkward or embarrassed about their periods or other aspects of puberty, such as their changing bodies. Smashing period stigma is not all about running down the street waving a bloody tampon, although of course you can if you wish to. Girls' and women's boundaries, body boundaries, are violated every day in various settings and with various justifications. In childbirth, which is another area that I've been involved in talking about, women are told a healthy baby is all that matters and are expected to allow others to do absolutely anything they wish to their body without complaint. So women are told things like leave your dignity at the door and that all your ideas of privacy will go out of the window when you have a baby, for example. In the debates about gender identity, women are expected to make way for men. In the current swimming competitions in the USA, in which Leah Thomas is taking all the medals, women are expected to move over without complaint about this very obviously male-bodied person. When I've written about this, I have had other women tell me that I'm not being kind and that everyone should be welcomed into womanhood and that we should give space and safety to trans women by allowing them into our changing rooms because they are not safe in the men's. Women, female people's safety, is clearly given a lower priority than trans women, male people's safety by those who argue this. When I hear about this situation, I get a very clear image of boundaries being pushed on and stretched in my mind. The boundaries between male and female. The long established boundaries between women's sport and men's sport. The clear physical boundaries of walls and doors between changing rooms. And the boundaries of women's kindness and generosity. The way in which women are forever pushed to accommodate the needs of others. As women, we have to develop very strong boundaries around what we will and will not do for others. Otherwise, our boundaries will be constantly transgressed, and we will be stretched, and we will be pushed past our limits. We need to help our daughters and the young women in our life develop good, strong boundaries across all areas of their lives. We need to teach them that it's okay to say no, and even to let another person take the hit if they don't want to do something. For example, if their friend wants them to go to the party, but they don't feel they want to, it's okay for them to say no, even if that leaves the friend without someone to go with. It's okay to turn down the offer of a date with the boy in school, even if that hurts his feelings. It's okay to come home early from the school trip if you don't feel safe, even if this puts your parents out. It's okay to politely say, "I'm speaking," to someone who interrupts you. It's okay to tell your siblings to get out of your room. It's okay to speak your needs, and you don't have to apologize or sweeten the pill or make things better or easier for other people all the time. And clear body boundaries are all a part of this. It's a positive thing for all people to have clear body boundaries. As children grow up, this can mean developing an awareness that some of our body parts and experiences are private and not feeling comfortable sharing them with anyone and everyone. For this reason, I would always support single-sex toilets from age 8 and upwards in schools. I think the physical boundary around girls' and women's spaces is also a really important metaphor for the clear inner boundaries that girls and women have to get very good at developing and sticking to if they don't want a lifetime of putting other people's needs before their own. It's frustrating when this discussion gets framed around prudishness. They're just bodies, get over it. Or even around period positivity. It's great for boys to be exposed to these things, etc. As someone who's worked as a therapist with children in care who have experienced abuse, this attitude rings alarm bells for me. Anyone who knows anything about child safeguarding or abuse will tell you that clear boundaries are such an important message for children. For example, your body belongs to you. And it's not just relevant in abusive situations. As young people become teenagers and begin to have their own sexual experiences, it's again extremely helpful to them to have a clear sense of body boundaries and to know that some parts of their bodies are not to be shared unless they absolutely want to. Whether it's to help teach and reinforce clear body boundaries or simply to make periods and puberty less embarrassing for young people, single-sex spaces are much needed. This means safe spaces that are structured around sex, not gender identity. It is okay for girls to have boundaries and their own specific spaces built with their needs in mind. If we start eroding these spaces, I feel we send a worrying message to girls that their privacy and boundaries do not matter.
Thank you so much, Millie. You kept within your time too, so that's great. Thank you. It's a subject very close to my heart, privacy and single-sex toilets. And I think what a lot of parents, sorry, that's your alarm. What a lot of parents don't realise is they can talk to the schools about this. They can talk to the local education authority about single-sex toilets. They do have a say in it. We may have more questions coming up on this later in the morning, but for now, we should move on to our next speaker. So thank you again, Millie. Our next speaker is Stella O'Malley, who is a psychotherapist and author whose work focuses on parenting, family dynamics, and working with teenagers. She's the author of 3 books, Fragile, Cotton Wool Kids, and Bully Proof Kids, which will be published in the UK on the 31st of March. Stella is the founder of GenSpect, an international alliance of parent and professional groups whose aim is to advocate for parents of gender questioning children and young people. Today, Stella will talk about gender non-conforming children, their well-being, mental health, and how to manage and counteract homophobia and bullying. Thank you, Stella. You're up next.
Hi, thank you very much for having me, and the speakers have been fabulous so far, very, very interesting on so many different levels, so I've really enjoyed it. I am going to share a screen here, and I'll just go to the beginning of the slideshow, sorry, if I can. Yeah, what I want to, I suppose, address in this is how important it is that we keep an eye out for gender non-conforming children as they go through the school process. This is a kind of a well-established kind of psychosocial stages of development. My point really for this slide is really between 13 and 21, the stage is appropriate for the child to explore their identity. And role confusion is part of that. And that's why you might have heard Az Hakim talking about it if you're very involved in gender politics. But he's a psychiatrist and he talks about how it's very, very, very common and appropriate for especially teenagers to examine different roles and to try out different gender identities, to try out different status identities, to try out all sorts of different identities so that they can figure out who they are. And when they're in their early 20s, they start to come to a place of where they start to get to know who they are, and they concretize their identity, and off they go into adulthood. And it's generally, really honestly, like Erik Erikson has it at early 20s, it's really into kind of 24, 25 before the brain is fully formed. And our job, if we're working with teenagers or children, is not to concretize identities. It's to make sure that there's a space for the child to explore it. And, you know, we've done well in this in many, many different aspects of life, but we haven't done so well for the gender non-conforming child. That child has kind of been left out in the cold. And when you look at the actual kind of how did we come to a world where so many of the girls who are teenagers have long hair, so many of them are wearing so much makeup, how kind of pink and blue it's become, you'll realize by studying it, it was marketing. Really, they started to realize that there was an awful lot of money to be made out of babies, children, and teenagers. And the way to do that was to very much emphasize the pink and the blue. And you see it yourself, the child who was born in 1980 versus the child who was born in 2000. The difference in the color of the baby grows, the color of the birthday parties, the bedrooms, the nurseries. Pink and blue came, and it came with a bang, and it really, really stayed in a massive way. And it's become, we had almost left behind gender conformity, and we got sprung back into it. And, you know, I think around about, I don't have my figures on this, but around about 80% of kids, it's fine. Maybe even 85%, it's fine. They don't care whether they're pink or blue. It's fine. They revel in it. They just go with it. And there's a certain section of child who just says, no, I don't want this. I'm much more comfortable with the opposite sex. I don't want a pink imposed on me when I'm naturally somebody who wants to be around a kind of the boys. And how do I navigate that? And something around that has become very, very difficult for so many children in schools these days. Those kids are getting lost. With that kind of gender non-conforming child being lost and kind of being unsupported in many ways, something else has happened. And this is the extraordinary rise that any educator who's watching this video will have seen with their own eyes. The 5,330% rise in the last decade of female children presenting at the Tavistock seeking treatment for their gender distress. And so that is a huge number, a huge rise, a frightening rise. If there was the equivalent of that rise in the sale of Mars bars, I'd be interested in. What the hell is happening there? It's an extraordinary rise, and it's particularly prevalent among girls, although it is also prevalent among boys. If you look at this rise, this is just boys and girls, and it's still an extraordinary rise. It's about a 2,000% rise in the decade. And so what has been coined as a phrase to describe this extreme rise of something that has never before been seen in the medical literature is the phrase ROGD, which is a term used to describe the phenomenon of adolescents who suddenly and rapidly experience a socially mediated expression of gender dysphoria. So that means basically suddenly, never seen before in the literature before, there has been an awful lot of adolescents who suddenly identify as trans. It's not a diagnosis, it's a description of a phenomenon that has happened in recent years. And in my view, it represents them very well, that it comes in like a rocket and it lingers. And I think of those gender non-conforming kids who've been kind of oppressed by the pink and the blue, and how I can see how they suddenly want to push back. And then something is happening online, and we saw it very well the way in Stephanie's presentation, how these people are kind of being corralled into something, and it feels like gender distress is where they're ending up. I think it's really important to note that the first kind of famous non-binary coming out the first famous gender reveal party, I got my words mixed up there, in 2008. So this is in America, And this woman kind of did a huge party. It was in the media, a gender reveal party. We'd never heard the concept before. And so, you know, there was a cake, and out from the cake sprung a pink balloon that we all realized it was going to be a girl. Now, that child, who was the kind of target or the victim of the first gender reveal party, has since come out as non-binary. And it's like, wow, there you go. You throw gender down the throat of children and they might kick back and say, hang on a second, back off with the pink and blue, back off with all this kind of emphasis. And as a result, I think an awful lot of these kids who have kicked off against gender nonconformity, good for them, I'm with them all the way. Sadly, an awful lot of them have got into a socially mediated situation online where there's a deep amount of distress. And a huge amount of these kids are very vulnerable. If you look at the most famous kind of study on this demographic, 43% had a history of being isolated from their peers. This is Lisa Littman in 2018, by the way, this study. 45% were engaged in self-harm prior to identifying as trans. 48% had experienced a traumatic or stressful event. Very often bullying came up, by the way, prior to their identification as trans. And 63% had other diagnoses. And Christian spoke about this with the autism, the massive correlation between autism and gender identity. And, you know, it's a really interesting and not very well known fact that females with autism are more likely to experience early puberty. And not only that, people with gender distress are more likely to have experienced puberty early. And I'm sure Millie Hill will give us an awful lot of insight onto that. But it's an interesting correlation that early puberty hits, especially females, very, very difficultly. It's a really heavy kind of thing to handle, to be the first person with the bra, the first person with your period. If you're also autistic as well, that's a kind of a double whammy. And then put that onto the fact that autistic people are more likely to be gender nonconforming. And you've kind of got a perfect kind of cake of this is why, of course, they're experiencing distress. We're pushing them into places that they don't want to be, and they're kicking back. And 69% of this group had social anxiety during adolescence, which is why we need to be very, very, very careful around these kids. They're generally timid, gentle, a little bit lost. They've identified as trans very often as a way to kind of find a solution. And they have often experienced bullying. And when we look at the bullying cycle, you know, there's the target and there's all these people around the target. There's the bully, and he's generally the villain of the tale. There's sidekicks and wingmen who can actually often be more vicious than the actual bully. They're the kind of the soldiers of the bully. There's the disengaged bystanders who are really not noticing and kind of are off playing sports and not really noticing. In a way, you could park them. There's the torn bystanders who are very aware of what is happening and they don't know what to do. They're torn, they're distressed, they want to help, they don't know how to help, they're scared. They need to be helped, I would argue. The upstanders need to help. Generally, they will stand up for the target. They can often be bullied themselves. They need extra support. And there's adults. And that is generally what's going on in any school, anywhere. And the more that children see this actual cycle, they see this slide, they see what's going on, they can see where they are in the picture. And the more that there's education around that, that it's not just the bully versus the target, that is just reducing the situation to an extreme degree when there's an awful lot more going on. That if everybody's educated to this is actually more likely what's going on, then people can find where they are in it and see how they can help and see where are the adults in this, and are the adults helping? Are the adults making a difference? Is the target being left to their own devices? And does somebody need to inform the adults that something is going on? So it's really important, I think, that teachers show this to children. How schools can help bullying is they have to have meaningful diversity and inclusion. That's not just posters. That's a kind of a strategic kind of analysis of making sure that our school supports difference, because difference is the most likely predictor of bullying. And so you create also an upstanding culture, and that would mean on many levels that you make sure that the upstanders are supported, that if they speak up, that you have created enough knowledge in your school that they realize this is an upstander speaking, it's a vulnerable place to be, and they need to be supported. You can do this with projects on history. You can discuss how the Danish Jews were looked after by Denmark in a way that all the other countries didn't look after their own. You can do it with kind of projects around any sort of kind of psychosocial kind of interventions that have happened. You can show children kind of, let's say, little kind of YouTube clips of how, you know, a child is being bullied and how people are ignored. You can show them the kind of, you know, the different experiments. They've done loads of social experiments in schools, and, you know, they're acted, but they're really good to show children. And like, let's say there's a famous one where there's smoke coming through the door, and they have all these actors in the room who are ignoring the smoke because they're too afraid to stand up to the crowd. You can show children things like that. They find it interesting. It's all about group dynamics. You're teaching them about group dynamics, and you're in a way teaching them about the concept of around bullying. You can educate about nuanced topics such as internalized homophobia. How often, and so many people have said to me when they've come to me, I'm a psychotherapist, and when they've come to me in clinical practice, they've said the worst homophobe I had to deal with was myself. And I didn't realize that. Now, imagine if you're a little butch lesbian, you haven't yet figured out where you're at, you're 14, you're gender non-conforming, you're feeling all over the place, and there is no role model for the butch lesbian in your school. There's no role model for the butch lesbian online. Where are they? And so make sure that your school creates it. Make sure you educate about body shame. I don't think enough has been said about sex phobia, about people are literally very, these days it's very notable of the teenagers I work with, they've kind of got a phobia around their puberty, around their sex characteristics, around their breasts, around their hair. They really seem to have an extreme fear of growing up, and it's directed towards their developing body. I'm sure Millie has kind of explored this a lot in her book, My Period, which I got from my daughter, which was a roaring success, by the way. Thank you. I really recommend it. But things like that, the kind of actually we go there in schools and we say there are people who are very resistant to growing up, and they start to hate their breasts. They start to hate their body hair. And you're teaching them about that, and you're giving them a freedom to realize that's what's going on for me. Projects that celebrate liberated gender nonconformity, liberated being the key term. I'm a fan of Grace Jones or David Bowie, or, you know, there's many of them, Frida Kahlo. Projects on historic bullying, art projects that explore liberated identities. Get artistic, you know what I mean, and make sure that liberated identities is given a large kind of understanding, as opposed to a kind of, it's very reductive to say somebody like maybe Caitlyn Jenner is a liberated identity. Is it swapping one kind of repression with another? And what is liberated? Is liberated a more kind of playing around with your identity and just being whoever you are? Staff need to learn how to hold neutral space. This is a very important point, that if staff jump in and celebrate an identity, they could be inadvertently concretizing an identity. They could be solidifying an identity that is still in the process of formation. And so it's very important that staff learn to hold neutral space. So if somebody says, I'm a communist, they go, that's great. Yeah, good for you. If they say I'm trans, they say that's great, good for you. And you allow children to work through their identities without going, this is really important. We're going to change the school policies. We're going to change everything because you've declared one identity. Because they're in a process of identity, and our job is to hold space as they find themselves. And they're unlikely to find themselves at 14. What they're likely to do at 14 or 15 or 16, they're likely to be checking out different identities. And so the adults need to get out of the way and not intervene and solidify and grab and basically prematurely foreclose an identity and narrow this child into this corner. And lastly, teach children how to ask for help. I think it's very important. I think Tanya spoke about this a lot, and so did Millie, about the importance of being able to kind of say no, being able to have boundaries, being able to be in a world, in a school where saying no is enough, and you don't have to kind of defend yourself on the reason why you're saying no. You've learned that no is a word, and it's a full sentence, as they say, and your school has supported that concept. Schools can do a huge amount around supporting the child. And they can also, and I presume I'm running on, so stop me if I am, but just to say one last thing, is there's a sad case in the Daily Mail, I think it's today or yesterday, about, Abigail Martinez is the mother, and she's the mother of a gender non-conforming child. And when the gender non-conforming child was questioning her sexuality, and she was starting to fancy other girls, and she spoke about it. It's over in America that it happened, but I've had a lot of experience that the very same has happened in the UK. Not the same tragic ending, but certainly the same scenario. The girl is questioning her sexuality, and she kind of got lifted into LGBTQ plus groups and ended up being basically suggested and very heavily implied that she was trans. The mother felt that the child had other issues that weren't being addressed. And when you look at this demographic, it's very likely she did. And instead, the school supported the child to keep secrets from the mother. And the child tragically ended up taking her own life. And the mother has now come out, and she's in the Daily Mail saying, I knew there was other problems, and I had a good relationship with my child. And so it's not the school's role to intervene in a loving and engaged relationship between a family and a child, and to think that they know better. It's more the school's role to spot any kind of distress that might be happening. But if the parent has shown themselves to be loving and engaged, to suddenly support a child to keep secrets from their parents is pretty high-handed and shouldn't be done without a serious level of analysis, and make sure that you're not kind of jumping in where angels would fear to tread. So I don't know, have I much longer?
You really haven't much longer. There are just to give it another, we're running well within the overall
Okay,
time.
I'll give one more minute, and I'll just say,
yeah, that's okay. Keep going.
Stephanie gave some great talk about, about the issue around female sexuality. You're a slut or you're frigid. You can't be anything in between. It's a horrible division that girls are confronted with. As soon as their bodies develop, it's like, which are you? Which are you? You're a slut or you're frigid. You're one or the other. And, these girls have these very complex kind of handles to kind of, complex kind of identities to handle, as in, you're supposed to be sexy, but you're not supposed to be slutty. How are you managing that? And you're 13 and you have a physically developed body, but you don't have a corresponding mature mind. And so that's why we have to create a kind of a culture where the students can kind of learn about boundaries early, in the first year in secondary school, if at all possible. They can learn about how to say no, because you'll equip them for life if you do that. I'm releasing my book, Bully-Proof Kids, at the end of the month in the UK. And the whole point is tricky people are everywhere. Risky situations happen. And if you can teach your children how to handle tricky people, how to get out of risky situations, how to learn how to say no, how to establish your boundaries, you've given them a gift for life. And it's an incredibly important thing to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stella. Oh my word, there's so much there to unpack. We're running fairly well with time, so we're going to have a few minutes of questions for the last few speakers. Unfortunately, as technology fairies would have it, my question and answer button isn't working today. But what I have got, our colleagues send, some of you will have seen your questions. I think I've answered some of them. There's one in particular that I wanted to put to Stella, if you just bear with me. Yes, it's on the bullying question. What would you do if a school attempted to apply the cycle of bullying around a misguided concept of transphobic bullying, with children being chastised for accurately stating the sex of their peers? And I think one of the problems there is the children that are announcing they're trans, they're affirmed straight away by the adults in their lives. And straight away, everybody's painted into a corner and has to defend the affirmation. Whereas you'll find, especially kids in primary school, and certainly one of my children who's got Asperger's, she says as she sees. She's not going to be able to absorb, as Christian was just talking, autistic children are quite literal, and it's very difficult for them to what they would see to be lying about something? How can that be managed?
Well, I think a culture of truth has to take precedence in everything. The ability and the freedom to speak the truth has to be protected. Bullying, a rule of thumb for bullying would be, repeated aggression from somebody with more power. And I would wonder, is this person, who's been called a bully, does she have more power, or is she just speaking the truth? And does education need to come into this situation? Because I think it's very, very important that we say speaking the truth is not bullying. Repeated aggression from somebody with more power is bullying. We need to really educate. And that's one thing I give quite a lot of time to in my book, which is bullying is a very specific thing, and it shouldn't be kind of ruined by people misusing that term. And this sounds to me like it could be kind of education could get us out of that. And I'd love that person to kind of, whoever wrote in the question, to kind of maybe contact me, and we go further and we discuss it with the school, if you follow me, that there are enough organizations at this stage who are ready to kind of advocate, to speak in, to kind of say, well, there's more to this situation than meets the eye. An in-depth analysis will get us the best result here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stella. I'll just bring up one more question and then we'll take a comfort break. And it's about the book, My Body Is Me, Rachel Rooney's book, which many of us are trying to work out a strategy of how to get this into all our primary schools. As you know, the parents can come in and say, here's this good book, maybe put it in the children's library. It would be so good. Have you any thoughts of the best, most effective way of explaining, sorry, let me start that again. Do the panel and attendants have any thoughts on the best, most effective way of My Body Is Me by Rachel Rooney, and an A4 sheet explaining the bodily disassociation and susceptibility to beliefs ASD kids may experience into every nursery and infant school? Again, it's about telling the truth, I suppose. Would it be better or more effective to raise funds to send copies to the head teachers, or to get individual parents to take copies directly to their child? There's a lot there, but how to get the book into the schools, I think, is the question, really. Anybody got any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, we've had, quite a few people buying up copies and then, really generously donating, buying the copies and then distributing them to local schools and libraries. And I think that's a really good way if a local group could get together to do that. I think, for us, it would be too big, with everything else we're doing, too big a job to do that nationwide. But, any resistors groups or groups around the country that could take that on for their local areas, schools and libraries, we've had a lot, and it's really fantastic. We're so grateful to everybody who takes that on and does it, and of course we would promote that. We do that. I mean, we do, when people do it, we promote it on Twitter without mentioning any names. We keep it, but yeah, I think that is a really good way. If you've got a group locally that would be willing to take part in that and do the work, that's fantastic.
I know it's something we're looking at in Wales. One particular group of us are looking at doing something like this for that book. So I think it will be a project that we'll take on fairly soon.
There is a question about it being a Welsh translation, and I've just replied to that question. We have a translation in Portuguese on the website as a download. The issue comes up with printing and printing costs if we do it in different languages, of course, but certainly for a download, we're so careful. The message has to be absolutely correct. So we always need to know a native speaker who we absolutely trust to check any translation for us. So that's what we do. We're very willing.
I think we can provide a couple of native speakers, even on this screen as I'm looking. I know there's at least one.
Trust.
Yes, who we trust. As I say, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I can't see the questions coming in, and my colleagues are sending them to me through WhatsApp. But I think most of you are getting your questions and coming back to the attendees and giving them the answers. If there is anything else that people need an answer to, maybe you'd WhatsApp me, the tech people behind this. Right, we're going to take a comfort break. It's 1 minute to midday, so we're only about 10 minutes behind. Shall we come back at 12:05, and we'll have our 2 last speakers then, if that's okay? Everybody okay with that? 5 minutes? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And excellent. Just give us another moment or two. I'm not quite sure how many more. Yeah, there we go. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was enough time for a quick trip to the loo. Wasn't enough time for a cup of tea. I've ordered it from my husband. He's on his way upstairs, hopefully. Right, the final part of our morning is we're going to look at the really tough topics that we need to manage when guiding our young kids and teenagers. Ali Morris is a feminist activist and campaigner who's worked within the violence against women and girls sector for over 12 years. She's a qualified social worker and was the coordinator for Swansea Council for Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence. Whilst, I'm very sorry, my camera's off. I do apologise. At least I wasn't on mute. Whilst working at Swansea Council, Ali encouraged the council to adopt a zero tolerance policy for strip clubs in the area and obtained the first ever funding for a local project supporting women in prostitution. Ali will talk today about child exploitation, sexual harassment of girls, prostitution, violence against women and girls, and protecting our children. Thanks, Ali, over to you.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Oops, didn't come on, hold on. Can everybody see that?
Not yet, we saw something briefly and then it went away.
Can you see it now? No.
No.
Hold on, I'll go back and do it again. Oh, typical, isn't it? Why can't I get it now? Right, try again. Can you see it?
Okay, yeah, something happening. Yes, it's there. Yes.
But so I need to go on the slideshow though, do I?
Yeah, go to the slideshow, then it will fill the screen.
Oh, so
Now, that's gone again. When you went to slideshow, it disappeared. So if you have to stay on the
yeah, when I click on slideshow, it's not working. Sorry. Can you see it now though?
No.
It's gone again.
No.
Sorry, everyone. Hold on.
Don't worry, Ali, it'll come back. We'll get there. Actually, Kerry can share your slides if you want.
I'll let me try a minute because I'd rather just try and click them myself. Hold on. It's coming up again. You see it?
We have, but it's not the slideshow. It is your slideshow, but it's the busy screen with all the other.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to keep it on that if that's okay with you.
That's fine. Yes, of course it is.
Okay, so sorry about that. So good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to try and skip through some of them quite quick because I know I don't want to be repeating what some others have said. So as Deidre said, what I'm going to be talking about today is what's actually happening to our girls in school. So although it's recognised that both boys and girls are at the receiving end of sexual harassment and abuse, I'm talking specifically about girls today. And this is to recognise that the overwhelming majority of sexual violence and abuse is perpetrated against girls by boys. So this is very much a whistle-stop tour overview and a flavour of what is happening. So the first thing I want to say is the issues that we're going to be looking at is, as adults, we have no idea about the severity and level of abuse that girls experience. So if you do think you know, you actually don't. So double it, treble it. That's what I tell everybody. It's more than you could ever imagine. So some of these have already been discussed by Deidre at the beginning. So we know we've had 2 recent reports conducted within Wales. Eston, which was last December, and then we had Plan International that did a State of the Girls' Rights in the UK, a Wales Insight report from 2019 to 2020. So Eston, as Deirdre said, reported that 61% of girls did specifically experience sexual harassment. Plan International had said that 60% of girls had experienced some form of sexist language aimed at them. So again, we've got the 61% of girls against the 29% of boys. In year 13, we had 95% of girls saying that they had seen it happening. The biggest thing for me, though, which I think is really concerning, is that 46% of everybody that had experienced it firsthand didn't tell anyone, and that was either their friends, a teacher, or a parent. So the Wales Insight report clearly told us that girls actually are fed up and frustrated with the lack of progress on gender equality. So in the report, many girls were also critical of RSE lessons within their schools. And one of the biggest complaints was that their experiences were not being listened to. So when you look at the 46% of them not telling anybody, you can see why that is. So what are we talking about when we say sexual harassment? Again, that's something that can be quite flippant and we bandy the word around. So sexual harassment, as well, technology and social media mean that girls are now accessible to abusers 24/7. So 24 hours a day, whether they're in bed, whether they're in school, or whether they're shopping, they're open to abuse. So digital platforms and social media are where girls live their lives. The digitalization of sexual harassment now means that we are seeing behaviours unknown only a few years ago, and behaviours are so much easier to perpetrate. So some of the common things that girls are telling us that are happening to them are sexting, which is the sending or receiving of sexualized images, videos or texts. And in this situation, we're talking about unsolicited. Upskirting, which is taking a picture under somebody's clothing without their consent. Sharing of sexual images, and specifically around boys sending pictures of girls around to other boys, or possibly posting them online. And they could have been images that actually were consented to at the beginning, but obviously if they've split up or the relationship has ended, the boy has then gone on to use them as some form of bullying or worse. Sexual touching and sexual violence. So these can be anything from grabbing or touching a girl's breasts and other body parts on top of clothing. Girls have said they've gone under clothing, and anything then from serious sexual assaults onto rape. So one thing that I was really shocked at reading a number of reports is about the expectation of violence and abuse in girls' relationships. That seems to be something that they're expecting and something that is really high. So one thing I was really concerned at reading a report on the BBC News last week around the Eston report was that the Deputy Chief Constable of Dyfed-Powys Police, Claire Parmenter, said that most cases of sexual harassment between pupils were low level, and they weren't seeing many high-risk cases, even though she had written to all head teachers and she was encouraging them to report any of these cases. Now, I find this kind of response by the police baffling and actually unacceptable. Children, because they are just children, would struggle to manage the emotions brought up by any of these experiences that we've just been talking about. So who are we as adults to tell children that what is happening to them is low level? What we are telling girls is that it's just not worth bothering about. We aren't telling them that what we're telling them is this behavior is something they'll just have to get used to, and it's expected as part of being a girl. So how on earth is this expected to encourage girls to report their experiences to schools or for anybody to take them seriously? So child sexual exploitation. So what is that? So it's based around grooming. So put simply, grooming is when someone builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child so that they can manipulate, exploit, and abuse them. And this can happen online or in the real world. So a young person, as part of that grooming process, is given things in exchange for sexual activity. So these things can be anything from alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, jewelry, and very commonly now, the sort of the latest iPhone. And these iPhones are then used not as a gift, but they're used as a controlling device, so that the abuser can actually check where that young person is day and night. They're tricked into believing that they're in a loving and consensual relationship with the abuser. So one form of grooming is called the lover boy scenario. So when an older boy, or usually a man, often manipulates the girl into thinking that actually they're in a romantic relationship and they are a romantic couple. And it's not just about the grooming gangs and the girls living in care homes that are so prevalent in the media. We are talking about, individuals, whether that's, boys in school or older men, not just these big gangs. So don't be fooled that it's not an individual. And stranger danger. So stranger danger now has a different meaning to what it used to when we were younger. The internet and social media has obviously created a new form where young people can be groomed. So, they're meeting them on social media apps, on gaming apps, and whatever they do online, there will be an abuser there present. And as Tanya mentioned in her speech earlier, groomers can also groom the parents, friends, teachers, and professionals who are actually around that young person. So the whole family unit and the whole unit where that girl lives can be groomed as one. So Dr. Sophie Hallett, in her research briefing, found that difficulties and problems can sort of increase sexual exploitation. And there's never one reason why somebody can be exploited or why somebody is vulnerable to being exploited. It is very much a mix of complex reasons. And these can be things like abuse at home, mental health issues of the child, homelessness, poverty, drug and alcohol issues, again, a learning disability such as autism, which we've just discussed as well. So they use sex as a coping mechanism. So exchanging sex for all these things that we've just mentioned is part of their coping mechanism for living the life that they're living, for being in the situation that they find inescapable often. One thing that Dr. Sophie Hallett found in her research, which I was quite surprised by, was some young people are actually aware of the coercive nature of that relationship, but still that relationship was often better than their home life or the poverty that they lived in or the mental health difficulties that they found themselves experiencing. So again, we need to be thinking about that when you're talking to a young person. So for her, she made it quite clear that to tackle child sexual exploitation, you have to tackle the underlying problems, why that child is vulnerable to it and why that child will often refuse to come out of it. And for me, the RSE curriculum is an important step in that process. You have to be talking around things like mental health issues, equality, homelessness, obviously the sex element of it. So it's a very difficult, I'm not saying it's a very simple thing, and it's not something that a school can necessarily take on board on its own, but it's something that it has to tackle and play some element of. So child sexual exploitation, it is happening in Wales. It's not just London, it's not just Manchester, and it's not just the massive cities across the UK. Some of you may have heard about the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. They've had a few reports that have come out of that, and some of the statements that they've published have been quite sort of fearful, really. We found extensive failures by local authorities and the police. So again, at the higher end where we know police and social services should be tackling these things, they're just not doing it. There was an assumption around child sexual exploitation that it didn't happen anymore, that it was on the wane. But what they found was actually it was more of a hidden problem and it just wasn't understood. And for us in Wales, one of the cities that they highlighted within the report was Swansea. So what they found in Swansea was there was evidence of missed opportunities of disruption of sexual exploitation of children. And in some particular case in Swansea, it was really clear to see the social services and the police hadn't tackled it. So no issue is more pressing for contemporary child protection than the role of the internet in facilitating child sexual abuse. Now, that was something that the independent inquiry came up with. So I think most of us who are talking here today understand the role of social media and the internet, and we just can't ignore that anymore. So where does prostitution fit into that then? So for me, prostitution for girls who have been groomed is just a natural progression often. And like child sexual exploitation, there's no single route into it. There's often a web of complex interwoven social factors, very similar to the child sexual exploitation ones, which are familial abuse, mental health, substance abuse, poverty, homelessness, if a child is in care, and lots of other vulnerabilities. So some people may not know that the average age of entry into prostitution is around 13. Now, when I worked on the ground, I worked on a project for women within prostitution. And when we started off the project, we did some work with women and asked them the questions: how did you enter prostitution? How old were you? You know, give us some background. And where I live in Swansea, the average age was 14. So we know in Wales, in cities and in towns, there are young girls aged 13 or 14 being pulled into prostitution, being groomed into prostitution. And again, when I was talking to some of the women on my project, when I was asking them how it started, it usually started for a packet of cigarettes or a bottle of cider or for £5. So again, we're talking about very, very sort of small things that young children, because they are young children, don't usually have the money to buy. So the reality is as well that the younger the girl is, the easier the target she is, and the easier it is for her to be manipulated and abused and pulled into prostitution. So the narrative around prostitution, especially in Western cultures, is that it's a valid way for women to earn money, and it's often seen as a tool of empowerment, and especially sexual empowerment. For me, that in itself is a tool for mass grooming of women and girls by a society and culture that places women and girls central to men and boys' sexual needs and their desires, and that they should be available 24/7. So, you know, we often see the phrases, don't we? You know, sex work is real work, empowerment, the word choice is bandied about. Obviously, you know, I could do a 3-hour session around prostitution, but it's just to say that, you know, girls who have been groomed from the age of 12, 13, 14, very much see this as the next step moving on into adulthood. So we really need to be disrupting this while they're young. I just mentioned girls are growing up in a culture where I suppose the influences are overtly sexual, and the overlying message is that sexual prowess and sexual availability is the valuable, if not the most valuable thing that girls can own. So social media then has created a complex situation where girls can be groomed and pulled into the sex industry now at a click of a button. So the ease of access from both sides, so from the girl who enters prostitution and from the abuser who can pull them in, is just so easy. It's so frightening. So this ease of entry intertwined with a culture, which I've said puts value on a girl's sexual availability above all else, we are seeing many of what is being labelled low-level platforms. So one of these is OnlyFans, and you may have heard of that. It's a subscription-based media platform. And I was trying to trawl through the internet last week to find some stories around it, and every single one was positive. Wales Online had a story about 2 weeks ago about a care worker who had now left her job because she was making more money on OnlyFans, and you know, they were implying basically that her job was menial, it was boring, it wasn't valued. But, you know, taking her clothes off on OnlyFans was making her these thousands of pounds a month. And that's what she decided to do. And there were many stories around women who had really good professional jobs, nurses, teachers, who had left to be on OnlyFans, but were actually praised for doing this, which again, what that is telling our young girls, I think is just really damaging. It's full of celebrity profiles. So you've got all the rappers like Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, they've all got profiles on OnlyFans. It's now full of pornographic content. That is what it's well known for. And again, one thing that the sex industry does is that it calls these women who are being exploited something else. It gives them a powerful name. So they're called content creators, just like women in prostitution are called sex workers. So now they're not women being exploited on the platform. They've got agency over what they put. They've got their own power. They've got their own way of making their own money, and they're content creators. What they don't tell you is around the harassment many women and girls experience, about the abuse they get from men online. You know, even when they're on there, men can actually take video of them and take pictures of them while they're doing whatever they're doing on OnlyFans, and then that can be used again against them, sent out across the internet. So, you know, a lot of women are saying that once their bosses find out, they're being shamed in work, or if they're teachers in school, the children are finding out, they're having anxiety, they're having depression, they're having panic attacks about it. But these are things that actually women are not told when they're going into it. I wanted to talk just a bit about minority groups, because obviously that was a very, very basic thing around girls in general. We know that some groups have additional difficulties and issues around these, so these are added on top of what I just spoke about. So if you look at girls from Black or minority ethnic groups, for example, they will have a lot of racist bullying, racist sexual slurs. For example, we know that, you know, pornography, which I haven't touched on today, we know that pornography is full of racial slurs against Black women and sort of myths around the sexuality of Black women and girls. So they may be getting a lot of that as well. Black and minority ethnic girls may be getting some issues at home due to culture. So it could be, they could be facing FGM, honor-based violence and that kind of thing as well. So you've got lesbian and bisexual girls who, again, could be having slurs about their sexuality or the way that they look, or that, you know, just the fact that they're not, you know, we talked about sort of gender norms earlier. It could be that they look lesbian, so they're being slurred about that. You know, there's lots of things around that. And if girls are non-gender conforming, or if themselves have a different gender identity, again, boys could be using that against them. We have girls who are disabled. That could be physical, emotional, or with a learning difficulty. Again, their specific disability will be used against them. So slurs against if they, you know, have a physical disability or how they look, or if they've got autism, for example, again, that would be used against them. And for a lot of girls, and I think this is really relevant for now, if girls are living in poverty or in care and they haven't got the, you know, the latest trainers, they haven't got the latest phone or the best haircut, or they're a bit unkempt, again, that is something that can be used against them. Boys will turn anything into a slur, into a bullying slur, into a sexual slur. So, you know, just to be aware of those extra difficulties that those specific groups will have. And also there's other groups that I haven't mentioned as well. So what can you do about it? And actually there's lots that you can do about it. So that could be as a teacher, a parent, a carer, or just, you know, somebody mentioned earlier, as an adult, we all have the responsibility to safeguard our children. So the first thing I would say is listen to what girls are telling you. In the research that I just mentioned, many of the girls said that they weren't believed, or that they didn't think anything would be done if they did tell. So listen to what they're telling you, but they may be using different language to what you're used to. So it could be they're using words for sexual body parts that you haven't heard before, or they're telling you in a very sort of, you know, strange, different way. If you're unsure, then just ask them, just clarify with them what they're actually telling you, but listen to them. So the next one, obviously, is if you're listening to them, you have to believe them when they tell you something. Look out for signs. So those signs could be things like, not that they do have a new phone, they do have the latest trainers. And this could be when you know both their parents are unemployed, for example. So there's some little clues there you could be picking up on. Is there an older man or an older boyfriend picking them up from school? Have you seen somebody hanging about? So that kind of thing. Are they not going to the bathroom on their own? Are they too scared to go outside in the break time? Are they never alone? Have they always got a gang of girls around them? It could be that they're scared because there are certain boys that are targeting them. And the biggest thing is, if somebody has told you something or you've recognized something, act and be seen to be doing something. So obviously you can go behind the scenes and speak to your head teacher or a safeguarding lead, or if you're a parent, come into the school. But that girl will really appreciate the fact that she can see something being done, because that is what they're telling us in the research, that nobody is being seen to do anything. So you may ask, well, what is it I can do then? So a big one for me is have visible messages to both the girls and the boys. And this is for adults as well. When we talk about things like rape campaigns, the messages are always targeted to the victims. Let's put posters up in the schools around boys' behaviour and what they should and shouldn't do, and what is and isn't acceptable. And I think that's really important. So it could be, again, that you have a specific safeguarding lead. So they could talk to classes, you could do something in assembly on a specific topic, and ensure that your RSE lessons are factual and do not erase the issue in your school. Because I think it was the Eston report, some of the schools had said it doesn't happen in our school. And they found out that actually they just didn't want to believe that, because they could have been top of the leaderboard in their area. Now, actually, for me, if I was choosing a school for my child, I'd want to see that they were tackling bullying. I'd want to see that they were tackling the sexual harassment. If I saw a school where it didn't happen, I would have suspicions around that. So, and it could be that some schools just believe that they're already doing what they need to do. And again, it's about making sure that you've got up-to-date information and you've got, resources in your school that are up-to-date. So call some external agencies in, and as Dee said, we will be giving you some information at the end of this. But the biggest thing is believe the girls, act on it, and make it a priority for your school. Make it known within your school that you will not tolerate this from boys, and you will be supporting the girls. And I think that will do something. So I could have spoken about this for a whole day, but also haven't. So that's just a very brief flavour of what we're sort of talking about in a massive, massive issue around this for girls. So thank you for listening to that, and I will answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Ali. That was so informative. And what I'm really appreciating here is everybody's presenting the difficulties we're in, the challenges we face, but you've all come back with solutions as well, how we can make this better, how we can help our kids. I'm going to move on to our last speaker now. Michael, thank you for your patience waiting all morning. And Michael's going to talk about the tough topic of pornography and how to talk to our boys. Michael's the founder of Men at Work and creator of 10 Dialogues for Boys and Younger Men. He's worked in secondary education for 16 years, delivering a wide range of citizenship and wellbeing programs. In recent years, Michael has developed bespoke CPD training for school staff, unpicking social influences on the values and beliefs of boys and young men, and how some of those influences can manifest in a range of problematic and destructive behaviours. More recently, Michael co-founded Humanize, an online repository of ideas for teaching RSE, and we'll be giving you a link for this later. Today, he will talk about how to talk to our boys about sexual harassment, pornography and abuse. We must name these problems in order to be able to address them. Over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Diolch. Yeah, Boris, thank you very much for having me. There was no need for patience at all. It was absolutely fascinating. I've really learned a lot and really enjoyed listening to the other speakers. So it's a privilege to be invited. Thank you very much. I'm going to share screen. I've got a few PowerPoints and hopefully it will kind of work. Basically, I set up Men at Work while I was still working in high schools, which I've done, as you were saying, for 16 years. I'm now fully self-employed doing Men at Work because of the volume of incidents that were coming to the fore, arising. I mean, those 16 years really have tracked the arrival of the internet pretty much, and it is phenomenal to see the shifts and the different kind of modes of abusive behaviours, bullying and and coercive control and stalking. The whole shooting match really over those years has become kind of digitized and online. The sharing of images, of course, almost impossible. The idea, you know, even 20 years ago, the ease, there was no possibility for instant and widespread sharing of images. Now, if you've got a phone, you are a pornographer, a potential pornographer, and it's that simple and that stark. And there are some really stark realities that we'll kind of touch on in the next 10 minutes or so. But hopefully, what I'm about to talk about sits well with what other people have spoken about, and it presents part of a solution. There are many solutions, and very complex solutions, because the problems are complex and many. But hopefully, it will be seen as a contribution to reducing and ultimately ending the kind of an epidemic of sexual harassment and sexual assault of girls and women by men, young men as well, and boys. So, my framing is absolutely constructive. It's not about blaming young boys or a priori, just assuming that they're bad and talking to them in that way, because that will bring down shutters. And we need to be constructive. We need to present a healthy and a positive alternative way of being, and alternative set of skills and abilities. So it's about having purposeful dialogues with boys and young men in school settings, whether that's mainstream or alternative provision, or indeed in custody, in custodial situations. Next week I'm working in prisons with young men. And the reason for doing it is about harm reduction, promoting harm reduction, to collaborative safeguarding. I mean, a few of the speakers have said absolutely rightly that we are all part of the safeguarding picture, and young boys need to be part of the safeguarding picture as well, for themselves and for the women and girls around them. We want to support the ability to find and identify and sustain healthy relationships. We want to promote critical thinking, and because we want to work towards a positive societal change. Obviously, that phrase, it's happening here, and the best practice assumption is, of course, it can happen here. But I think we're really touching on a situation where, as exactly as Ali said, if a school or an institution of any kind is saying it doesn't happen here, that they are dangerous institutions. There's a dangerous culture there. It's willful ignorance at best, or plain denial. So we have to assume it is happening here, work on that assumption, and we need to name the problem as part of that. So spell it out, what is happening, who is doing what to whom. Which brings us back to the centrality of acknowledging sex as the axis on which sexual harassment operates and sexual abuse operates. How could it be otherwise? And not getting drawn into the vagueness of kind of gender and gender neutrality. We need to talk about sex of those who do, and the sex of those who are done to, because that is the story. And any move away from that takes our eye off the ball. So it's about naming the problem, saying what's happening, who's doing it, but then why are they doing it? Now, either you subscribe to the idea that boys will be boys, and all of that entails, and that it's all written in the stars, or fate, or it's decreed by God, or it's it's just kind of evolution, that we are abusive and that women are abused, or you don't subscribe to those beliefs. And I don't subscribe to those beliefs. I think that our values and beliefs and behaviours are ineffably socialized, and that we're conditioned to think certain things and behave in certain ways. And that offers hope, because that's a malleable situation. It's not carved in stone. We can do stuff, we can change things, and we can engineer situations that are positive and healthy. Otherwise, it's just throw your hands up in the air. It's all bad. It's always going to be bad, and just give up. And that is unacceptable. So then again, what can we do? I said, it's happening. Why is it happening? What can we do to stop it happening? That's the kind of the breaking it down in three of the approach. So we're looking at, in the work that I do with teachers and youth workers, social workers, I'm doing training a lot of social workers at the minute, family support, key workers. We just talk about naming that problem. What is happening to girls and young women? And this is kind of the roundup of what is said in their daily experience. So it's physical, it's digital, it's catcalling, street harassment on school buses, in school playgrounds, university campuses, the street, wherever, in shops, I mean, wherever basically. And then it, physical, so unwanted assault, touching, things like that. The use of drugs, sedatives and spiking, the use of surveillance. I've spoken to 2 separate 14-year-old boys in the last year who were using tracking devices on their girlfriends. One had put them in, the little thing, I think it's an iPhone thing, I can't remember the make, but it was about £9. And he put it in the lining of her coat. And the other one from another school put it in the lining of her school bag. So it's basically what was once sophisticated, the preserve of spies, literally, James Bond stuff. Any child is able to buy the equipment and to engage in a very, very alarming kind of coercive control from any age, 13, 14, 15. This is new, historically new. Ease of access to porn, historically new. It's like a massive social experiment for which there's no precedent. I mean, picking up on ancient themes, of course, but the technology changes almost everything. There's nothing new under the sun, but the speed, the volume, and the ease of which harm can be done from a very early age is astonishing. So broadly, this is part of naming the problem. Yeah, yes, of course. Of course, the overwhelming majority of cases, the person committing the abusive act is male. That's a fact. And by male, I mean a young man or an adult male. The overwhelming majority of victims are female, and by female, I mean a girl or a woman. There are those interchangeable terms. This is fact, so we're talking about sex-based fact. We need to acknowledge it in order to effectively work to end it. You can't end a problem if you don't use the relevant language to describe it. It's a fantasy, we can't do it. We must talk factually, and this means acknowledging sex and that sex matters. Of course, boys and young men and adult men can be abused too, and this is also a fact. Often, though not exclusively, those abusing them are other males. Acknowledging these facts is not anti-men. It's an opportunity for boys and young men and adult men to play a vitally positive role, and an invitation to make the world a better place, to be that upstander that that Stella was talking about earlier. So, and then if we start thinking about the mindset that leads to the abuses of girls is a completely unhealthy mindset, and therefore it will take a toll on boys and young men as well. It couldn't not do, because it's a completely unhealthy mindset. So we can start seeing some elevated cases around mental health, whether it's self-harm, suicidal ideation, suicidal practice, substance abuse, being prey to grooming and radicalization. Often with social workers, we have very long conversations about county lines, about gangs, about radicalization to the far right, to fundamentalist Islam, because they are basically, apart from the material benefits that, carrying drugs and etc. will bring you in terms of money, it's an appeal to masculinity, the idea of being a man, proving you're a man, and proving that you're not a woman, and all of that kind of body of language around there. Male on male violence is, of course, we are our own worst enemy. The mindsets that lead to abuse of women per se involve poor relationships. They mean poor relationships. And of course, there's 85,000 men in prison in the UK, many of whom are under 30. So why? That's the question. In the work that I do with boys and young men, but also with the people who work with them, we just break it down. We say, what has gone into our minds? What messages have been transmitted, reinforced over and over and over again? This is what comes back on aggregate from any group that I've ever done it with, and this is going back nearly 10 years now. Be tough, be dominant, get the last word, banter, i.e. Be good at banter and don't be upset by banter, and everything's banter. Money power, obviously no boys have actually said money power, but they've said things like earn more, get a better job, have a flash car, have some nice clothes, jewelry. It's about being visibly financially superior, having the economic edge. Not too gentle is a direct quote, something that was staying with me for quite some time, from our 13-year-old boy. The idea of vulnerability and gentleness going there. Don't be emotional, almost all say. Typically they say boys don't cry, but almost always they say it's okay to be angry. We don't lose status by anger, displays of anger. In fact, we can accrue status, we can acquire status. And then if that's our only kind of permitted outlet, that will lead to all kinds of other, it can only lead to other emotional and mental ill health, but also for those around us, principally women and girls. Sexually active, of course, the assumption is that heterosexual. If we think about all the films, books, video games, birthday cards, t-shirts, all that stuff, what I do is I ask the boys to boil it all down, squeeze the sponge of their brains, and I say, what is the world putting in your heads? I'm not asking them what they've invented, because none of us invented any of these things. We articulate them, we enact them, and we continue them, but nobody's inventing any of this stuff. And broadly speaking, they say, yeah, straight, you get laid a lot, you have a lot of sex, you have lots of partners, you've got the money, you get the last word, and you're tough. That's the message the world has given us. That's always what they say, always. And also that you don't need help. If you don't need help, you don't ask for help. It's shameful to ask for help. Therefore, that's got implications for physical and mental health for ourselves, but also for the women and girls in our lives, because we everybody needs help. The boys are keenly aware of what happens if we break these rules. Nobody has ever said, I've got no idea. It's like, where do you stop? Where do you start? Where do you stop? Bully, ostracized, lost opportunities, attacked, murder, self-harm, etc., etc., etc. They know that by the age of 10. Then we move on. What is the language that's used to punish men by men? How do we peer police? What words do we use? And these are the words with which I'm sure you're all totally familiar. And the question, therefore, is a push back to the boys and young men then. If the worst thing we can say to each other is that you are this kind of combination of words that are kind of to do with women, about women, or the female or the feminine, however we want to kind of group those words together, what does that tell us about the world that we live in that has put those messages in your heads, in our heads collectively? And that's a difficult conversation, because the only answer is that it tells us that the world thinks that women are worth less than men. That's a difficult sentence to come out of your mouth when you've never had to say that before. We live in this world, but we don't articulate the principles of it. And having these conversations with teenage boys is really, really important. But it almost never happens. There is very, very little work, programmatic, over time, creating a safe space where we can explore these ideas. It's like hen's teeth, or even rarer. I suspect. So the rules, they know them. The punishments, they know them. The language, they know them, but they don't like what it tells us because it's about hate. It's about hating women. It's about misogyny. And that this is the well that we drink from with our words and our actions and beliefs and values. And the job, therefore, then is to work with the boys and say, well, what else could the world be like? What could we be like? What could we do? How could we feel? What would our friendships be like? Our relationships? What is available? And what are we missing out on by trying to keep each other and ourselves in line with the rules? So obviously, I mean, I think this is from Let Toys Be Toys. This in the work we look at these, we say, where do these words come from? I think it was from it was like a study of the packaging on toys for kids aged 2 to 8 in the modern era, 3 years ago maybe. That's it. I mean, basically that's the story. Girls are emotional and they've got friends and family and they like to be looked at and to be pretty and to be delicate and a bit superficial. Boys do stuff, and a lot of the stuff they do is aggressive. It's either fighting or winning or beating, or also there are no relationships. We don't expect that of boys. There is a word friend. It's right at the bottom. It's tiny. It's under special forces. And on the left, we've got love, we've got friendship, we've got all of that. These are the messages the toy industry are blasting out. Then we get to the clothing industry. And I mean, where do we go with this? Who's that for? We know it's for a boy because he's blue. Bingo, right, Pavlov's dog. Also, when you put it next to it, this was from Primark. I think Let Clothes Be Clothes drew my attention to this a few years ago. There's worse stuff out there as well. Basically, the question is that I do with the boys is I work through it. Who's it for? What are the differences? Can you swap the messages? That always raises a kind of a mirthless laugh. Of course not. Who's making the decisions? Well, the boy's making his decisions to organize his multiple girlfriends, but the girl is not even allowed to make the decisions. It's someone off camera, and we assume, generally people suggest it's her dad, that she's not allowed to date. The boy, yes, lots of girlfriends, lots of sexual activity. And then we start thinking, well, wait a minute, these are for toddlers, these jumpers for toddlers, what's going on there? Only real answer, corporate paedophilia and collective paedophilia endorsed as undeniably, that's what it is. They're on sale in the UK in the modern era. So those are the kinds of activities that can be done directly with boys. I'm not going to, this is too big a subject here. However, should we have a rematch at some point, I'd very happily walk through this. It's about acknowledging the fact that by 16, many boys will have watched between 300 and 500 hours of porn online. And certainly in England, the expectation of the government, the Department for Education guidelines are that pornography will have been discussed. I mean, that grammar there basically means nothing. It means you could have a half-hour conversation or 40-minute conversation delivered by somebody who is not a subject specialist. Same in Wales, same in England, same in Scotland. I don't know that everybody fully understands that the delivery of PSHE and RSE is by non-subject specialists in almost every case. So it could be PE teacher, maths teacher, geography teacher, may have been coerced into doing it in a very kind of, would you mind, really help us out, or volunteered, but with no real training. Where do they get the resources from? You go online, or you get emails from God knows who saying God knows what. A lot of the materials have become pro-porn, certainly neutral on porn, which is pro-porn, the same thing, effectively. Not porn critical at all. Ambivalent around prostitution, and perhaps I've seen pro-prostitution stuff, again, the sex workers work, etc., delivered by teachers who are nervous to mixed groups, and sometimes single sex groups work best for these discussions. I'm a believer in single sex and mixed sex, not just everything mixed sex. I think we do, because messages land differently. I don't want to ramble. I just wanted to put this on as a parting shot, I think, because I know my time's up. Basically, one of the dialogues is called, in the resource, is called Taking No for an Answer. It's not called consent, because I think that possibly narrows things down a little bit and may stop people kind of tuning in. So really, it's an exploration about non-verbal communication and the fact that we're very skilled in most cases in reading other people's behavior, body language, tone of voice, and that our culture actively encourages boys and young men not to take no for an answer. In a lot of cases, we celebrate a lot of business people, sports people, inventors, discoverers. It's the insistent nature of their work is celebrated. We need to acknowledge that and walk through that and think, right, but that's okay. Resilience is good, perseverance is good, great. But what about with other people and their boundaries, their autonomy, their free will? We need to develop a really deep understanding of when yes and no are right to take. 30 years ago, someone with a physical disability would have been told, no, you can't go to university. No, you can't take part in the Olympics. No, you can't do X, Y, and Z. Things change. It's good to challenge no sometimes, but we need to have really meaningful conversations with boys and young men about the appropriacy and the ethics around yes and no. And yes, obviously sex is part of that as well, but perhaps a broader conversation rather than, again, 1 hour conversation about consent delivered by non-subject specialists who nobody supervises in terms of their well-being. There is no clinical supervision for people delivering really challenging subjects with young people. It doesn't exist. You might get a friendly colleague saying, are you okay? But maybe not. You could be a survivor of rape. You could be a survivor of abuse of all kinds, domestic abuse, and be given a list of things to do. And that could impact on your own well-being. We're really letting our teachers down across the whole country, the whole of the UK, England and Wales and Scotland, and Northern Ireland, but we're really letting our kids down as a culture, as a society, giving a couple of hours a week tops to talk about fundamental things for their well-being, physical, mental, emotional well-being, and sexism and misogyny is always the last to be talked about. It's the elephant in the room. So we need to start looking at the elephant and saying, what's it doing here? What can we do here? What is the problem? Why is it happening? What can we do? I don't think I've been very eloquent, I'm afraid, and I've rambled somewhat, but we can do a lot. We can do a lot if we've got the will. We've got the mechanism, the schools, we've got the resources, we've got really good teachers, and we can do it, but the will is missing, and that's what we need to change. And without that, sexual harassment will continue, sexual assault will continue. All of the harms that we name will continue if we don't have a collective political will. That's what's missing, I think. Open to dialogues with anybody who's tuned in. Whenever, just drop us an email, and really happy to have conversations. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Michael. You did not ramble and you were very eloquent. You really were. I am very conscious we're actually on the button 1 o'clock, but I want the panel, if anybody wants to stay on, please do. If the panel want to go back with any additional bits, do know that we are sending out all the resources that you've provided us with to all the attendees tomorrow. Just listening to Michael and Ali, well, to all of it. In fact, I wish all 7 of you had written the RSE code in Wales. We wouldn't have to have this webinar this morning. But getting people that are specialist trainers to deal with our children and to carry the load for the teachers who aren't specialist trainers. I think that's so important. So I'm sure you'll be having questions throughout the webinar. Most of you have answered the questions yourselves. I have one in particular here from Michael. Yeah, I appreciate you naming the problem, but how in practice do you ensure that boys don't then turn off if they're called out and in that way? It's a difficult balance if they close down completely, and denial must play a big part in their behavior as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I think the approach is really important. I think spending a lot of time thinking about why you want to have a conversation and what you think is a potential outcome of it. How do we get the thing we want? How do we get the thing we want? It's something that I keep asking myself all the time. You know, I want that. How do I get it? Not I want to be seen to be doing something, or I want to be able to tell Ofsted or Ested or whatever it might be. I want to be able to tell somebody I'm doing it. And I turn down work from people I know who are doing tick box stuff. I don't want to do it. I won't do it. I won't do assemblies, 500 kids for 40 minutes. Pointless. I'm not going to do that. I'll train people to have ongoing conversations with boys and young men who they've got relationships with, because that's how you build trust, and you understand, you know the family context, you know the young people. It's not a hypodermic needle model. That's not it at all. It's about changing the relationships we have with boys and young men, whether it's in schools or in custodial settings or youth works or teams, football teams, whatever it might be, and seeing that as a vehicle for kind of exploring how we've been shaped as well as men, and that we are in the thing together because we are occupying the same space in the world as men and boys. We are the ones that are called to by the messages, and we're the ones who choose to enact them or not. So there's a collective kind of task, rather than I know the right thing to do, you don't, I'm going to tell you now, sit down and listen. That doesn't work. It does not work. Why would we do a failed strategy? You know, I believe in building relationships over time and being frank, compassionate, non-judgmental, but blunt as well, and naming the problem. And you know, I'm a mental health instructor as well. And so having a holistic conversation about what's the impact of this behavior, what's your life going to be like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? This thing you say you want to be a dad or whatever it might be, what are the steps you need to take so you'll be safe when you get there? So it's about being safe, and it's about being safe to be around. That's what it boils down to. I don't know any boy or young man genuinely doesn't want to be safe, and genuinely doesn't want to be safe to be around. It's like working out, what does that look like in reality? Don't use the word respect if you can't define it. What does respect look like, etc. Every day you've got a girlfriend. How do you respect her? Don't just say it. That's bullshit. We all know that these words are bullshit unless you can prove what they mean in daily life. So it's a very practical conversation about how your life could be better. There is some rational self-interest in it, but I think that's an effective strategy. Don't lecture, don't take the moral high ground. So we're all in this messed up world, but we can choose to reduce how we keep it going. I did ramble then, sorry.
Right. Is there anything any of the panel? Yes, Stephanie, I see your hand up. Please speak.
Yeah, I sometimes go into schools and give an all boys schools and give a talk on feminism to 15, 16-year-old boys. And I always start off by saying, I don't believe in the oppression Olympics. I don't believe that white men are the enemy. You may have heard this. I you have landed in a culture that you have not created. What I want to do, and the message I want to give you is the messages that you are getting, because these boys are going on to incel sites, they know their stuff. And so I don't want to be part of that culture that's saying toxic masculinity, all of that sort of. So I, and I say what I always want to do is encourage you to critically analyze the messages you are getting from every direction, because if you don't analyze those messages, you are controlled by them. So take back your power, listen to what I'm saying, listen to what somebody who disagrees with me is saying, and think and make your own minds up. So it's just a way of, because I think boys are demonized, and it is the line that we have to really carefully tread when we're working in this area, which I think you've talked about brilliantly, Michael. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's true. It's a message about not being controlled by the negative values and being able to kind of contribute to building the alternative, which is empowering, ultimately, I suppose, isn't it?
Anybody else? Yes, Christian, please unmute yourself first, though.
Yeah, just sort of going back to the autism angle, of course, with autism, this I kind of alluded to it towards the end of my bit about the sort of the social justice angle. I think a lot of autistic people are really interested in social justice, and I do think they are very keen on seeing that the marginalized groups and vulnerable people are protected and helped. I mean, and of course, there is a flip side to that. I've met quite a few autistic lads who just don't care. But I think for the majority, I think there is that kind of real social justice element, and I think that is something that is worth exploring with a lot of autistic people in terms of, when you're looking at issues like pornography, sites like Pornhub, who have quite extensively recorded their statistics on who accesses their site and what kind of pornography is being searched for and what goes out there. When you look at that, if you pick on that and look at the kind of pornography that is being searched for and what is being put out there, you start to realize that it is sexist, it is racist, it is disablest, it is picking on a variety of marginalized or groups in society who are vulnerable and picked on, and it's kind of showing that and just saying, look, you are. Do you realize that the things that you were accessing online are actually having a deeply negative impact on not just the individuals that are involved in those acts, but on the wider society, on the groups that those people are from, and I think sort of raising that and as an issue, it hopefully will go somewhere in which to teach young people, and particularly autistic people who are interested in social justice issues, that actually these things are not the done thing, because I don't think that's spoken about as much as it could be in education. It certainly doesn't come across in the relationships and sexuality education document. There's no exploration of those kind of issues, and barely any mention of porn whatsoever. So, yeah.
Thank you, Christian. Could I encourage the parents and teachers, I know there are some teachers listening and watching us today, to really look at the resources and information we're going to send out to you. It's just common sense there are people outside the schools, each of the people speaking to us this morning, who have the specialism and the expertise to talk to our children. I'm not saying any of our teachers in the schools, no disrespect to them, but the training these people can give you to talk to your kids, it's second to none. So you're aware we're sending out links tomorrow, and we'll have all the resources linked there. I know schools have funding to buy in training. Also, this has been all recorded this morning, so we'll be up on our YouTube channel in the next few days. And what we've decided to do with the questions and answers, as I couldn't see them, other people could, we're going to do a blog or a document, a report on the questions and answers. I will embed that with the YouTube video, an article, that's the word I was looking for. And yes, we will have follow-up webinars. There's so much stuff here, you can't touch it in 10 or 15 minutes. So we'll aim to have a couple more at least by the end of the school year, because the RSE curriculum rolls out officially in September 22, although I know some schools are using it already. Is there anything I've forgotten, anything anybody else wants to say? Apart from a huge diolch an fawr agus gorma agus, and thank you very much to all of you. You're really so full of important information to impart to our teachers and our parents, and people are starting to feel supported now. I'd like the teachers out there to know the parents want you to get this right, and they support you in getting it right. So please listen to us when we come into school and talk to you about the resources that our children are using and that you're using to teach them. Any more hands up? No, I don't think so. Thank you all very, very much indeed. It's been such an informative morning. Really enjoyed it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye. Cheerio. Thank you.
Could I